Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. Today's topic, Yellowstone Escape, Wildlife and Wonders in Just 5 Days. Presented by NatHab Expedition Leader Jake Richards. I'm your host, Rob Mess. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Take it away, Jake.
All right, thanks, Rob. Hello, everybody. Like Rob said, my name is Jake, and I'll be talking about our Wild Yellowstone Escape adventure today. Um, so, if you are new to the Daily Dose of Nature webinar series, we put them out pretty much every weekday on a variety of different topics related to our trips and the wildlife that we see on those trips. This is part of the Know Before You Go series, which means I'm going to talk a little bit more about the nuts and bolts of this trip. So sometimes maybe you've booked one of these trips already and you're kind of curious about what it entails. You want some more information, or maybe you're interested in booking this trip. So this is the presentation for you. Um, I'm also really excited to talk about this trip because if you weren't aware, this is a new itinerary that NatHab just started last year. I got to run the first couple of these 5-day trips in the fall. They were a lot of fun. We had a lot of success seeing wildlife, and so I'm excited to kick these off in May. Next month, we'll be starting up these trips for the spring. So a little bit about me. Like I said, my name is Jake Richards. I'm originally from Vermont. I have undergraduate degrees in history and environmental science, and then I was a forklift driver for about a decade in my 20s. I moved west when I got into the Teton Science School's graduate program. So that's where I first was introduced to Yellowstone and the Tetons and the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. I did some environmental education up there. Just really fell in love with the place, fell in love with the Rocky Mountains. And so I've kind of stuck around out here. I came down to Logan, Utah, where Utah State University is located, got my master's degree here, and that's what I now call Logan home. That's where I'm tuning in from today. I've been with NatHab. This is going to be my 5th year with them. I started when I was in grad school, and after I finished grad school, started doing it full time. And I am now the lead guide for our Glacier and Yellowstone itineraries. As you can see from these photos, I've guided quite a few of our different U.S. National Park itineraries. Got to see a lot of cool places on those trips. And again, currently based in Utah, just a few hours south of Yellowstone. So, what I'm going to talk about today, here's just kind of a brief overview. I'm going to talk a little bit about geography so we all just kind of know where Yellowstone is. We know, kind of have some common language. Um, when is the best time of year to visit? It's a question I get a lot. Then I'll get into the logistics, again, some of those nuts and bolts of the trip. I'll do a very high level view of the trip itinerary, kind of how we spend those 5 days on this trip. Then I'll talk a little bit about gear, because I know that's something that a lot of people tune into these presentations to learn about and ask questions about. So I'll touch on that. And then I'll close with some photos of some of the wildlife that we hope and expect to see on these trips. So let's start out talking about geography. So where is Yellowstone National Park? I know people are probably tuning in from all over the country and possibly all over the globe. And so on the left, you can see the lower 48 United States, and you can see kind of that gray shaded area that is then blown up here on the right. So that gray shaded area is not just Yellowstone National Park. Yellowstone is kind of that pinkish, purplish square kind of shape in the middle of the map on the right, but that larger shaded area is the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. And that's a term that I like to bring up in these presentations because it's something that it's a term that we use throughout the trip. You're going to hear your guides talk a lot about the GYE, or the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem, because even though we travel through Yellowstone and Yellowstone National Park is the focus of this trip, you can see that we travel through this larger area. And as you can imagine, the flora and the fauna, the natural communities, they do not adhere to, man-made boundaries. So as we travel, we'll be crossing, some private land, some national forest, and obviously national park. But we're going to be within the greater Yellowstone ecosystem for the whole trip. So I've superimposed the map of the itinerary there on the right over the map of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. So you can see that is to scale. You can see that we're traveling through the greater Yellowstone ecosystem throughout the trip. So I think when I start talking about that I'm a guide in Yellowstone, probably the number one most frequent question I get is, when should I visit Yellowstone? And my answer may seem like a cop-out to some of you, but Yellowstone is an incredible place regardless of what time of year you visit. Um, it depends on what your priorities are, the things that you want to see, the qualities of experience that you prioritize. And so, as you can see from these photos, going kind of in a clockwise direction, even just focused on one species, the American bison, the buffalo, you can see that each season has something different to offer. So top left, that's winter season. We do winter Yellowstone trips. In fact, we just wrapped up our winter Yellowstone season at the end of February. And Yellowstone has very long, very cold, very snowy winters. And so going in the wintertime, I highly recommend, because you get to see these animals uh, in their natural habitat. You get to see how they've adapted to those extreme conditions. Moving into spring, which we're kind of entering the spring season now. It's still pretty much winter up there right now, and I'll get into some of the details of the phenology, or the changing of the seasons, in the next few slides. But springtime, just an incredible burst of new life. You can see these red dogs, which is what we call bison calves, running around. Springtime, so much life, so much, especially youth, calves and young animals, and the plants emerging. So there's a lot going on in the springtime. In the summertime, you see another change in behavior. You start to see the breeding season for certain animals. So these two bull bison going at it. This was a photo taken on a trip in August of last year. Side note, all of the photos that I'm using in this presentation, I've updated from photos taken on trips last year. So all of these photos are from trips that I took over the course of the last year. And so in the summertime, we got to see these two bull bison sparring, because that breeding season for bison happens in August. And so, peak summertime, it's hot out, and these animals just, have a pretty stark change in behavior at that time of year. We start getting into fall, September, October. It's really another transition period, again, like spring, because the animals are gearing up for that long, cold winter season, and different animals do that in different ways. The landscape, the colors on the landscape, as you can see from this photo, start to change, and so each month is a little different. And so we are running these trips starting in May, going through October. Again, usually our summer trips are the 7-day hidden Yellowstone trip, which, quick plug, I'll be doing a presentation on that 1 week from right now. So if you're curious about the differences between this 5-day itinerary and our 7-day summer itinerary, feel free to tune in a week. But spring and fall is when we are going to be running these 5-day Wild Yellowstone Escape trips. So in May, like I said, May is transition, because there's still a lot of snow on the ground. The snow is starting to melt, especially in the high country. And every animal, every organism really is trying to take advantage of that short summer. And so in May, we start seeing the calves and the fawns start to drop, like these two pronghorn fawns that we got to see within seconds of being born last year. It was really incredible. We got to see their first steps, which I think I captured in this photo here. But May is just very much transition from winter into spring. A lot going on. Things change quickly this time of year. Moving into June. June is what I would call the spring month in Yellowstone. So I know that sounds a little odd because in most parts of the United States, June is summer. It's summer solstice. You have certain holidays where everybody's out barbecuing. But June in the high country of Yellowstone is very much spring. And I would say it's probably the most colorful month because that's when most of the wildflowers start to bloom, like these lupins. You get the aster and the fleabane. You get the stickseed and the forget-me-nots. And so June, I would say, is spring. May's transition into spring. June is kind of peak spring, very colorful. I'm going to kind of breeze past July and August because, like I said, I'll be talking about them a week from now because we primarily run our 7-day itineraries in those peak summer months. But we're going to move right into September and just notice the difference in that color palette from June, skipping past July and August into September. So things start to dry out. Fall is coming. It's right around the corner. There are a lot of places around in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem that don't get a ton of rain in the summertime. Most of the water comes from snowmelt coming down through the watershed. And so things tend to dry out pretty quickly over the course of the summer. And you start to see that change in that color palette, especially in August and into September. You also start to see some changes in animal behavior. For example, September and into October, we start to see the beginning of the breeding season or the rut for many of the ungulate species. Bison happens in August, and there's reasons why different animals have their breeding seasons in different times of the year, and we'll talk about that on these trips. But September into October, we start to see the breeding behavior of the elk. Like in this photo here, we got that one big bull with the big antlers on the left-hand side with this group of cows. This is a harem. And so we start to see some of that breeding behavior. And I will say one of the most incredible sounds of the fall in the American West is the sound of elk bugling. And so that's something that we keep our ears peeled for, especially on our fall trips, because that's when that behavior starts to change. So October, I would say, is another transition month. We talked about how May is that transition from the winter season into spring. October is when you start to get that fall into winter transition. So you start to see snow on the mountain peaks. You start to see the landscape colors change. The grasses dry out. The aspen start to turn that beautiful golden hue. And so October really is that transition month. Things cool off, animal behavior changes. The bears start thinking about where their den sites are, and they start, they're fattening up. They're in that state of hyperphagia. And so, again, different behaviors, different colors, different things to see in any of these months. So that was an extremely long way of saying, when's the best time to visit? Depends on what you're looking for. I will say, as far as human activity goes, fewer people go in the wintertime. And that's, for it's really extreme conditions. A lot of roads and facilities are closed. So if seeing fewer crowds is kind of a priority for you, highly recommend looking into our winter Yellowstone trips. But running these trips in what we call the shoulder season on either side of summer, those spring and fall trips, we're also probably going to see fewer crowds than we will in some of those peak months. Our summer trips are still phenomenal. Your guides know a lot of tricks for finding spots and times of day where we avoid some of those crowds. And summer is just not only a time of a lot of human activity, but one of the reasons why there's so much human activity in the summertime is because there's so much animal activity too. With those long, cold, snowy winters, it means summertime, everything is just cramming to soak up that warmth and that sunlight, and there's just a lot of activity among the wildlife as well in the summertime. So I talked a lot about changes over the course of the year. There are some things that are pretty consistent that don't change over the course of the year, and one of those is the geothermals. And, in fact, the fact that they don't change very frequently has led some of them to get their name, like Old Faithful. And Old Faithful is a very consistent, iconic geothermal feature in Yellowstone. And on these 5-day trips, we do take time to go explore some of the geothermal areas, and we get to go down and see Old Faithful. Also, the geothermals are just incredible places. They're a huge part of the history of Yellowstone National Park, which some people may not realize. Uh, Nowadays, Yellowstone is kind of a destination for wildlife viewing, but the geothermals were one of the reasons, in fact, the primary reason why Yellowstone was protected as the national park in the first place. And so we take the time to explore some of those areas like you can see here in the photos. Okay, so let's talk about some of the activities that we do on this trip. This is considered a low activity trip, meaning we don't do a lot of big hikes. We're not summiting any peaks. We will go on some walks throughout the trip, especially on some of the boardwalks in the geothermal areas, like you can see in the photo on the left. We also get the opportunity to spend an hour or two with Dan Hartman in the lower right-hand corner, you can see. And that's just an opportunity for folks to learn a little bit more about what it's like to live in this place year round. Him and his family have been up here for going on 40 years now, and he's an acclaimed photographer and videographer with some incredible stories about capturing the wildlife in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. But if you look in the top right, a lot of our time is spent looking for wildlife. And often the way that we do that is we'll be traveling to different wildlife hotspots. We'll be using our binoculars and our spotting scopes to try to find those animals. Sometimes they can be at a distance. And your guides have a lot of resources at their disposal. We have a network of fellow guides. We have other sources of information. So from week to week and trip to trip, those places are going to change. Again, very dynamic landscape. Things are kind of changing from month to month and season to season. So the itinerary for each trip is going to be a little bit different because we're going to be going to different areas looking for the different behaviors of wildlife like I've been talking about. So our vehicles are our Sprinter vans. They are custom outfitted for the trips that we like to run. As you can see from these photos, they have the roof hatches. So if we're in a situation like the other two photos where we're close to a big bull bison wallowing in the dust, or we're kind of close to a bear, we can still have some incredible viewing opportunities from these vehicles. Again, these vehicles were custom outfitted exactly for what we do. And so we're really proud. We've been updating our fleet over the last couple of years. And the way that we break up the group, the way that these trips run, is that we usually have a group of guests from about 10 to 13 people. And we have 2 guides in 2 vans. So you do the math on that. There's 6 to 7 people in each van, which means everybody gets a window seat. And so we really, again, I'll keep harping on it. Our goal of these trips is to see wildlife. And so we make sure that everybody has the best opportunity to do so, even with the vehicles that we use. We'll get more into some of the really cool features of these vehicles when you're on the trip. We'll do a vehicle orientation because they really do have a lot of cool bells and whistles that are specifically designed for this type of trip. Okay, I'm going to take a few minutes to kind of, again, do a high-level overview of the itinerary. This is a 5-day trip, and so day 1 is arrival day. These trips start and end in Bozeman. So we will do a welcome dinner and a welcome presentation at the Armory Hotel, which is in the photo right here. This is where we'll spend the night before getting up relatively early the next morning to start making our way south down towards Yellowstone. So the drive from Bozeman to Yellowstone, about an hour and 15 minutes to an hour and a half, but it's through Paradise Valley, which is incredibly beautiful. We will have opportunities for wildlife and stops along that drive. But again, keep in mind your guide is going to be keeping a finger on the pulse of where the wildlife is, and so we'll make stops as needed to see some of that wildlife. But our goal is to get into Yellowstone usually around midday or a little earlier, and so that'll give us some time again to possibly check out a geothermal feature, look for wildlife, depending on what folks have been seeing in those areas. We're going to be spending 3 nights in the Gardner Mammoth Hot Springs area, and we're going to spend all 3 nights in the same place. So those of you that have gone on other NetHab trips, we move across the landscape. We have things like bag pull, and we move from hotel to hotel. One thing about this trip that I really love is that we set up home base in one spot for 3 nights, and from there we explore different areas in the northern part of Yellowstone. So we can kind of set up camp once we get down to the north entrance of Yellowstone. The next morning, we're going to be exploring the Northern Range, which is our term basically for the whole northern section of Yellowstone between Gardner, Montana, and Cook City, Montana, the north entrance of the park and the northeast entrance of the park. Lamar Valley is included in the Northern Range, kind of in that northeast corner. And again, based on the information that your guide has and the time of year, we're going to be targeting different species, but the northern range of Yellowstone is one of the best places to see a number of different wildlife species, including your large carnivores, like your wolves and your grizzly bears, coyotes, foxes. But really, the Lamar Valley and surrounding areas is called the American Serengeti, just because there is so much diversity. One of the highest concentrations of large mammals in the lower 48 is here in the northern range of Yellowstone. So we'll probably be getting up pretty early to try to get out in that early light. Especially in the warmer months, many of the animals are most active at dawn and dusk, and so we're going to try to capitalize, especially in those early mornings, to try to see some of those species. So big day. This is also about mid-afternoon. Usually we're going to go see Dan Hartman, spend a little bit of time there. Again, middle of the day is when some of those wildlife species are kind of hunkered down, a little less active. So we'll also do the same. We'll take a little break. We'll learn a little bit more about this place, and then we'll use that evening time to look for animals as well. Day 4. So again, we'll be spending the night in that Gardner Mammoth area. And then from there, on day 4, we're going to head south. We'll explore some new territory, and we'll be heading into what's known as the interior of Yellowstone. So kind of the large geographic sections of Yellowstone. You have the northern range, in the northern part of the park. The interior is kind of the center of the park. And this is where a lot of the geothermal activity is, as you can see from this photo of Upper Geyser Basin that I took last year. This is also where Old Faithful is. So day 4 is when we're going to head down towards Old Faithful, catch an eruption. We'll probably go for a little walk. And again, that drive and that walk and that whole day is also going to be traveling through prime wildlife habitat. And so we'll be making stops along the way, looking for some other wildlife species, and just kind of making a day of it. So day 4, Old Faithful is kind of the destination. That's as far south as we get on this trip. But again, looking for wildlife the whole way, and then spending that night as well up in the Gardner area. And then day 5, we'll be making our way back north to Bozeman. This is going to be our final day together. We'll be getting folks up to wherever they need to be for their next adventure. And so we'll be traveling back through Paradise Valley, again, making stops for wildlife as needed, but we'll make sure that we get everybody where they need to be when they need to be there. And that pretty much wraps up our trip. It moves pretty quickly. We pack a lot into these 5 days, and it's an exciting trip. So let's talk about gear. This lovely couple, I had the opportunity to take them to Yellowstone a couple of falls ago. These are my parents, and as you can see, this was This was actually a fall trip, end of September, beginning of October. And as you can see on this day, they were prepared for like a warm, sunny day with, a sun shirt and a hat. But I believe this was the same day, if not the next day. You can see they're dressed a little differently, with rain gear, warm hat. And this just goes to show that, especially in those spring and fall months, you see a wide range of temperatures and weather conditions. And so we recommend bringing layers. Layers is kind of the best way to prepare for those changing temperatures. I talk about a system that I call the base mid shell, which is kind of like, having a base layer, which if it's real cold, that could be like long underwear. In the summer months, you might not need long underwear, but having a base layer, then having a mid layer, which might be your hiking pants, maybe a fleece or a sweatshirt, and then that third layer is your shell, which, depending on the time of year, definitely recommend raincoat and rain pants. And the reason for that, I usually recommend that folks have their rain gear kind of stuffed in the bottom of their pack, because even if it's not going to rain, that rain gear can provide a little bit more protection from, the elements, whether it's, wind, cold, rain, snow, because, you kind of never know what you're going to get, especially, like I said, those spring and fall seasons. So come prepared, bring some layers. I also recommend warm hat and gloves, and I recommend bringing those any time of year, because even in the summertime, we're going to have some pretty cool mornings. Some of the uh, elevations on Yellowstone trips, we get up over 8,000 feet. Even driving, it's high country. Even the plateaus are at elevation, and so be prepared for that with a warm hat and gloves. I know packing can be kind of a stressful, stressful decision making for some folks, and so feel free to ask me about my gear. Feel free to reach out. Happy to answer questions. Some other things you definitely want to bring a day pack. Doesn't have to be as big or heavy duty as the one that my dad has in this picture. That's actually one of my packs that I let him borrow for the trip. But something that you're comfortable carrying around for most of the day, that you can fit those rain layers and some of your other gear. Um, Bring a water bottle. I know NatHab sends folks water bottles before trips, so make sure you bring those with you. If you have a camera, feel free to bring that along. We're going to be seeing some pretty incredible things, both wildlife and landscapes. So if you do have a camera, feel free to bring it. And then sun protection. Bringing a sun shirt, sun hat, because even if it's not super hot out, even if it's a cool day, if it's a sunny day, being at elevation, the air is a little thinner, and so that radiation from the sun can be a little bit stronger. And so, having layers to protect you from the sun is also good to bring. A few things that we provide include optics, so binoculars and spotting scopes. And that's because, again, this is big country. Sometimes when we do see wildlife, it's at a distance. And so we have the tools to be able to see those animals clearly, to be able to observe their behavior. And so we provide those things for you. Trekking poles, we also carry those with us. With both optics and trekking poles, if you have some that you are just absolutely in love with, feel free to bring those. But just so you know, that's optional. You don't have to. We'll have those available for everybody. And then sunscreen. So again, being at elevation, on a sunny day, we want to make sure we're prepared for that. Okay, moving on. Photography. So we do have some Yellowstone photography departures. The 5-day trips, I don't believe are doing specific photography departures, but keep in mind that most of the guides know a little bit about photography. Often we'll be bringing our cameras along with us, and happy to help folks get the shot. That's not like a primary focus of these trips. And we just like to set that expectation. If photography is like a passion of yours, definitely reach out to NatHab, ask about our photography departures, where we do make that a priority on some of those trips. I usually bring, I always bring two lenses with me because as you can see from the photos in the bottom right, we do have opportunities for wildlife photography and also landscape photography. And so I like having a larger telephoto lens for those wildlife opportunities, but also bringing along a portrait or landscape lens because we get to travel through some incredibly beautiful places. So I bring both. Another thing to touch on with photography is NatHab has been using our photo sharing platform for the last year and a half or so. And I think it's an incredible tool, an incredible resource that actually adds, uh, it allows for more meaningful moments on these trips. And I know that seems like a stretch, but here's why. Um, these trips go quickly. It doesn't matter if it's a 5-day trip or a 9-day trip or something in between. Our trips, we pack them full. The days, fly by. And I have found in my experience that a lot of folks get stressed out by trying to capture every single moment or every single experience through their phone or through their camera. And I will talk in our trips about the importance of being present in some of these places. And um, one thing that the photo sharing platform allows for is it allows us to share photos within the group. Both the guides add photos to the photo sharing platform, and all of the guests on the trip have the opportunity to do that as well. And what that means is by sharing the load, if you will, uh, of capturing like all of these incredible experiences that we have, it means that you as an individual, you don't have to stress about capturing every single thing. And you actually can take the time to be present in some of these moments that we have, that we get to share with the wildlife and with these places and with each other. And so the fact that we can share photos means it doesn't all rest on you to capture everything. And so you can actually be present and yeah, I'll be encouraging folks to do that throughout the trip because I think it's very important. Um, and it really helps us connect with these places, which as a guide, that is my goal, is to help you connect. And so again, love that tool. I love that folks have been using it, and it really adds more meaning to these trips. Okay. So let's talk about the wildlife that we hope to see on this trip. And I, I say that because we can't guarantee wildlife. One of the things that is both challenging and rewarding about this job is that, wildlife moves around. There are no guarantees, especially moving through different seasons. Like I said, their behavior changes. But that being said, those of you that are familiar with NatHab trips know that NatHab guides are pretty good at their jobs, and we usually are pretty good at locating the species that folks want to see on these trips. So, number one, birds. I'm a pretty big birder. Birding kind of sneaks up on you. It's only been a couple of years that I've really, been. Some of my friends might use the word obsessed. I think that's a strong word, but I do love birding, and it's interesting because so we talk about, especially on our winter trips in Yellowstone, we talk about how species adapt to those long, cold, snowy winters I keep talking about. They have three ways of adapting. They can hibernate, sleep all winter long. They can tolerate, which means they're built to tolerate those extreme conditions, or they can migrate. And a lot of the bird species migrate out of those areas, but then they come back. And so in the summertime, we see some species that we don't see in the wintertime. And spring and fall is interesting because we also get species that migrate through the area on their way to different parts of the continent. So spring and fall, I'm excited to run trips, NatHab trips in the spring and fall now, because we probably will see some of those migratory birds during those seasons. Okay. This slide you might find interesting that I'm putting it up during the wildlife section of this talk. Um, But this is the outflow of a geothermal feature. And some people might not think wildlife when they see a photo like this, but the colors that you're seeing and kind of some of those wispy lines and strands, those are not the color of the minerals. Those aren't the rocks. The colors that you are seeing is from the microorganisms that live in these environments. And they are fascinating. They're incredibly unique. Some of these organisms are only found in Yellowstone. They are endemic species. And so when we go to look at the geothermals, and we'll talk about the geothermals, it's not just about the geology and the volcano. We're also going to talk about the wildlife that live there that you're seeing in this photo. And there's even little insects that feed on. Basically, there's a whole food web within these habitats, these little mini ecosystems. Um, and so that brings in birds, and that kind of starts that food chain, and we're going to talk about that when we're at some of these geothermal features. It's incredibly fascinating and very unique. All right, let's talk about bears. So on our winter trips, we don't see many bears. So summertime is when those animals that hibernate, again, that's one of the three adaptive strategies of the animals in this ecosystem. One is hibernating. And so the summertime, again, a lot of human activity in Yellowstone in the summertime, but a ton of wildlife activity as well, because you have all of the hibernating animals. They are out and they are scrambling to get food and to breed. And we see all these behaviors through the summer that you don't see at other times of the year. Um, the bears wake up in the spring, they go to sleep in late fall. And so all of the 5-day trips that we're doing, we do have the opportunity to see bears. And there are two kinds of bears up in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. We have black bears, like you can see in this photo here. There are also grizzly bears, which we saw in the early morning light on one of our fall trips last year with the two little grizzly cubs trailing mama. So again, both species are in the ecosystem. Both species hibernate, and from May to October, both of those species will be up and will be active and will be doing different behaviors throughout the course of the year. Again, I'm a big bear fan. I love talking about bears, so that's one of the reasons why I'm excited to be up there in the summertime again. So, moose. We also have the opportunity to see moose in Yellowstone. You can see there's a young bull on the left, and then a cow and a calf there on the right. Again, over the course of the year, we see different behaviors among all of the different animals. Like, we'll talk about why is this calf still with mom in the fall. This is obviously a fall photo. You can tell from some of the golden brown grasses. Moose, there aren't a ton of moose in Yellowstone. That kind of surprises some people, and there's a number of different reasons for that. A lot of it has to do with the history of fire in the park and how fire has changed the habitats and where some of those foraging areas for these animals are. But we do know a few spots this was taken in Yellowstone, and so moose are another one of the animals that we'll be keeping our eyes peeled for. All right, let's talk about canines. So this photo is of a coyote. Coyotes are one of my favorite animals for a number of different reasons, but they are incredibly smart. They're very adaptive. And when we talk about the conservation history of predators in North America, especially in the United States, um, it's not all roses. We tried incredibly hard to get rid of predators in the American West in the late 19th and early 20th century. And we did a pretty good job of it. Wolves, mountain lions, grizzly bears. We almost completely removed them from the ecosystems out here. Coyotes, we tried just as hard to get rid of them as we did the other species. And we failed at it. Never got rid of them. In fact, the range and population of coyotes today is it's expanded. It's grown. It continues to grow, and that has a lot to do with both how smart and adaptable this species is. Also gets into the life history and the physiology. Anyway, you can tell I can talk for a long time about coyotes. Fascinating animal, but can't talk about canines without talking about coyotes' bigger cousin, and that is the gray wolf. The conservation story of the gray wolf in Yellowstone is powerful, and it's amazing to have the opportunity to see wild wolves in the lower 48. Again, that was something that not many people could say 50 to 100 years ago. Wolves are one of the primary species that folks are looking for when they come to Yellowstone, and that includes us as your guides. They are one of the priorities, one of the species we'll be looking for. One of the reasons why we have that network of fellow guides and the resources that we can tap into is to try to find wolves. Doesn't happen every trip because, again, there's only about 100 wolves in a park that is 2.2 million acres. So it can be challenging, but again, we are pretty good at it, and we want to find those animals, and it's just an incredible experience when we do get to see them. Okay, I think it's time with this quizzical little red dog here to open it up to questions, and I just want to thank you all very much ahead of time. What you got?
All right, Jake, thank you so much. So before we start in with the question and answer session, I would like to remind everyone that if you do have questions, you can submit them via the question field in your control panel. Just go to the upper right-hand corner of your screen. You'll see those three lines. Click on those, go down to questions, and go ahead and pop your questions in there. So let's pop into these questions right now. So has Yellowstone recovered since the floods in June of 22?
Yeah, so the floods were huge. They had a huge impact on a number of things, but primarily the road systems is probably what that question is directed towards. And yes, is the short answer. They've rebuilt large sections of the road, so all sections of the park are now accessible. There was a short window of time where some of the park was closed off, um, but yeah, we now have access to the whole park.
Great. That is excellent to know. So, can you talk about how animal sightings changed with the various seasons?
Sure. Um, so wintertime, because there are large amounts of snow and very cold temperatures, some of the species, I'm thinking primarily of elk. Elk tend to congregate in the wintertime. They have certain winter foraging areas. And that's true for other species as well. But in the wintertime, the elk tend to congregate on their winter foraging areas. And because of that, animals like wolves also tend to congregate a little bit more. Really, what it comes down to is knowing what the animals are doing and primarily eating at different times of the year. And that's one thing that a good guide knows a thing or two about. What do bears eat in the early season versus what are they eating in the fall? When are the berries getting ripe? Um, when are the ungulates following the green wave down the hillsides? And so yeah, there are changes in where we find animals throughout the year, and a lot of it has to do with food sources, and yeah, that kind of drives where we target different animals throughout the year.
Great, thank you so much. What is the closest distance that we would actually get to wolves? And is there a better time of year to see them up close?
Yeah, wolves are very unpredictable. One thing that we're really grateful for in Yellowstone is that wolves are not habituated. They're not fed by humans, and because of that, they're actually pretty wary, and they do stay away from humans, which for conservation success is a very good thing. It means they're less likely to be hit by cars or shot. So our close encounters with wolves are very few and far between, and I just won't sugarcoat that. We do see wolves frequently, as far as, the number of trips that see wolves. It's not every trip, but it's pretty close to it. But again, far sightings versus close sightings, I really can't predict that. One of the places that we target looking for wolves are places like the Lamar Valley. And one of the reasons why those are the best places to see wolves is because you have these huge open vistas with a lot of different animals. You know, you might see bison here, pronghorn here, elk up here, which also means that you have a lot of opportunities to see the other animals, the predators, the wolves. Um, but because these are big open landscapes, a lot of times we do see them at a distance. So I would say we see wolves pretty frequently. Usually they're quite a long ways off. Every once in a while, we'll be pleasantly surprised with a closer encounter.
Are pronghorn something that we would see as well?
Sure. Yep. So pronghorn migrate out of the area in the wintertime. So we occasionally see them in the winter because we do sometimes travel through their winter foraging areas. But in the summertime, we are far more likely to see them. Again, that photo of the pronghorn with the two newborn fawns, that was taken in late May. So they are starting to migrate back into the area in May. And so throughout almost the entire May to October season, pretty good chance of seeing pronghorn.
Gotcha. Awesome. Good to know. So, can you talk about what the main difference between the 5 and the 7 day trips are?
Yeah, sure. So I would say the biggest difference is our 5 day trip. We are we kind of a home base near the north entrance of Yellowstone, and we explore the northern range from that home base. Our 7 day trip is a one-way trip. We'll either start in Bozeman and we'll make our way down to Jackson, which means we also explore Grand Teton National Park and some of the surrounding areas on that southern portion of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. Um, and that's kind of the biggest difference. We don't get down to Grand Teton National Park on the 5 day trip because we're kind of focused on exploring that northern area. So that's the biggest difference.
Are there photo versions of either trip?
Uh, I would check with your NatHab adventure specialist, but the 7 day trip, I believe we have photography departures at this point. So our 5 day trip is kind of just getting started. We just started them last fall. I don't believe we have photography departures for the 5 day trip at this point. But if you're interested in that, tell NatHab. And again, as those of you that know NatHab well, know that we change things frequently based on feedback from guests. So if you're interested in that, please let us know.
Are there any other trips that you would recommend that we would book that could work well with the 5 day trip if we're in the
Um,
area?
yeah, so it's really for NatHab trips in the Rocky Mountains. Our primary summer trips are going to be Yellowstone and Glacier. They're not as close as you might think, so you could drive between the two. Um, but as far as NatHab trip goes, I would say I don't think we have anything super close to Yellowstone during the times of year that we're running these 5 day trips. But if you did want to explore more of the area, again, reach out to NatHab. I'd be happy to give some recommendations for things to see in the area. So, but as far as NatHab trip goes, in the spring and fall in this part of the country, options are kind of limited just because it's still kind of winter in the mountains. So, um, yeah, reach out, ask questions.
Gotcha. Thank you so much. So, how rare is it for us to witness a predator making a kill on one of these trips?
Ooh, that's pretty rare. They do it. Um, they do it less frequently than you think because a lot of this species. So it's kind of interesting. So wolves are decent predators. I wouldn't say they're like extremely efficient, and we'll talk about that on the trips. But they've figured out that the best bang for their buck is targeting elk. Now, a wolf will be, depending on the wolf, around 100 pounds, 80 to 100 pounds is probably the average. And they're taking down elk, which are 5 to 800 pound animals. So they'll take one down and it'll actually feed them for quite a long time. So while we don't see them taking down animals super frequently, one thing that we do see is hunting behavior. And one of those behaviors is they test animals all the time. And what that means is you have a herd of bison or a herd of elk, uh, even pronghorn or deer sometimes. And if we do see wolves on the landscape, we might see them, chase or charge some of those prey species. Because what they're doing is they're trying to like feel out the herd to see, if there's, say, a slower or a weaker animal in that herd that might be a better target for hunting. And again, they're only successful around 10 to 15% of the times when they're pursuing an animal. So I would say we don't see takedowns a whole lot, but we do see that hunting behavior sometimes on these trips, which is, again, still super exciting to watch because it's kind of like, maybe will they, won't they? It's a high stakes game out there, and so it's interesting to watch those behaviors, whether they're successful or not.
Great, thank you. So, is there a special memory or a moment from a Yellowstone trip that you would like to share with us that would get us excited?
Hmm. Um. Yeah, I'll go back to that pronghorn mom with the two fawns that I showed that photo of. That was a really rewarding moment, um, both as a guide and to be able to witness, for a couple of reasons. One is I've talked frequently throughout this presentation about the different times of year and seeing, how harsh the winter is and how vibrant the summer is, and to see these transitions. And it's, I don't necessarily get to know individual pronghorn, uh, but to see these animals, again, we rolled up on them just seconds after they were born, and we got to watch them for quite a while. I think we were there for like 45 minutes or something like that, just to see, um, mom recovering from that experience and to see them, wobbling, and to see her cleaning them off and everything. And just, we saw that at the end of a trip. We were making our way out of the park. We took a back road that your guides know about, that kind of gets us away from the more well traveled parts of the park. And we had this experience all to ourselves. And to cap a trip talking about these changes and these seasons and how harsh this environment is and what it's like to be living on this landscape, and to see these two fawns being born, and to put that in the context of what their life is going to look like, what the next few months are going to look like, in the next few years, hopefully, if they survive, or not. Maybe they will be the food source for another animal that wants to survive on this landscape as well. And I feel like that moment kind of tied the trip together. Everything that we talked about was kind of summed up in that moment. Um, and to have that moment to ourselves, knowing where to go is something that your guides take a lot of pride in. And so to have that experience with just us and those animals, and that's kind of a an experience that we shoot for, that really builds that connection between us and the landscape and us and these other organisms, these other species, which really builds empathy for the world that we live in. And I think that's, the point of trips like this, and maybe you have other reasons for taking these trips, but that's why I take these trips, and that's something that, was incredibly meaningful to me.
Jake, thank you so much for sharing that.
Mm.
Unfortunately, that is going to be the last question that we do have time for today. So I'd like to hand it back to you for your closing comments.
Yeah, well, thanks again, everybody. I'm really excited about this new trip. Yellowstone's a big park. Trying to cram as much as we can into, a 5-day trip is a really fun challenge as a guide. And again, just seeing this place in different seasons is incredibly worthwhile. I hope that when you take one of these 5-day trips, you're gonna want to come back, and I hope you do. And I hope I get to see you again, because I could spend my entire life exploring this place, and just because it's that incredible. So looking forward to seeing you all.
Jake, thank you so much for taking the time to present for us today. And I'd also like to thank everyone who tuned in today. If you're interested in information on how you can travel to Yellowstone with NatHab, please give us a call at 800-543-8917, or you can send us an email at info@nathab.com. Our adventure specialists are happy to help you out. Join us Monday for our next daily dose of nature. You can check out next week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude today's webinar. Goodbye, everybody. We'll see you next time.